They called me bad luck for 18 years. The day I left, I took all my luck with me and watched them fall apart without me. My name is Sarah. I'm 30 years old, and from the time I was old enough to understand language, my parents called me bad luck. Not as a joke. Not the way parents sometimes tease kids about things that are actually kind of funny. They meant it. They said it to my face, to each other, to relatives, to neighbors, to their friends on the phone while I sat in the next room doing my homework. Bad luck. Their bad luck. The thing that had gone wrong before they could stop it. Me? I was born second. My brother Jason came first by 2 years, and that age gap, that tiny, insignificant 2-year gap, somehow translated into him occupying a completely different category of human being inside our family. I don't know exactly when it started. I've tried to identify the original moment, the first time my parents looked at me and decided I was the wrong one. But I can't find it, because I think by the time I was old enough to notice, it had already been happening long enough to feel like it had always been true. What I can tell you is my earliest memory that involves my father is him telling my mother that things had gone better before I came along. I was 5, maybe 5.5. We were in the kitchen, and I remember the light because it was that specific yellow late afternoon light that comes through west-facing windows and hits everything at a low angle and makes shadows longer than they should be. I remember that light, and I remember his voice, and I remember not fully understanding the words, but understanding the feeling of them completely. 5 years old, and I already understood that I was the wrong answer to a question someone had asked. It just got more specific as I got older. My dad made a bad investment when I was 9, lost some money, not a catastrophic amount, not life-ruining, just a deal that went sideways the way deals sometimes do. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at me and said, "This started when you were born." 9. I nodded. Already knew that nodding was the smoothest path through these moments. My mom had this recurring thing with her health, nothing serious according to doctors but uncomfortable and persistent, and she had decided, somewhere along the way, that the explanation for it was me. My bad energy. She said this on the phone to her friends while I was in the next room. Said it like she was sharing a medical fact. Like I was the diagnosis her doctor had missed, and she'd had to figure out herself. By 12, I had accepted it as probably true. That's the part I need you to really sit with for a second, because I think it's the part that people who haven't lived this kind of thing don't always get. When the adults who are supposed to explain the world to you tell you something about yourself, you believe it, not because you're stupid, because you're a child and they're adults, and that's how the architecture of childhood works. You don't have the tools yet to look at the person saying the thing and think, maybe this is actually about your own dysfunction, and I'm just the convenient story you've been telling. You think this must be true? They know me better than I know myself. This must be who I am. So I became who they said I was, at least in my own head, quiet, careful, apologizing preemptively for things before I knew what I'd done wrong, walking through rooms like I was trying not to leave marks. Jason. My brother. I've tried to be fair about Jason because he was a kid once and he didn't invent the dynamic he was born into. He just learned it very young and used it without ever really examining whether it was right, and kept using it into adulthood long past the point where that excuse holds. Jason could genuinely do nothing wrong. I want you to understand, I'm not using that as hyperbole, or as a slightly exaggerated way of describing favoritism. I mean it structurally. Within our family system, Jason's actions did not produce consequences. They produced explanations. He dropped out of college, didn't gradually fall behind and eventually have to withdraw, just stopped going, then stopped pretending to go. My father's response was to blame the professors. Said they hadn't known how to reach someone with Jason's kind of intelligence. He actually wrote an email to the department. I found it years later and had to put it down because reading it was too much. 3 cars. Crashed 3 cars between 18 and 23. Insurance claims, 1 hospital visit, a phone call from the police. My mother's explanation for the third one was that Mercury was in retrograde. She said this at the dinner table. My father nodded like this was a reasonable thing to have said. He stole from my grandmother, cash directly from her wallet, when she was in her late 70s. My grandmother told my mother on the phone, and I heard it from the hallway. My parents called it borrowing, said Grandma was being uncharitable in how she was characterizing it. Meanwhile, I dropped a glass in the kitchen once. Just a regular drinking glass, slipped right out of my hand, broke on the floor in that way. Glass breaks where it goes absolutely everywhere. My mother walked in, looked at the glass, looked at me, and said in this completely conversational tone, like she was commenting on the weather, "Everything you touch turns into disaster." I was 15. I swept up the glass and went to my room and sat on my bed and stared at the wall for a while. The nickname came around this time. I think my mother used it first, but honestly, the origin is blurry, because once it started, it spread through the extended family with a speed that still turns my stomach when I think about it. At family gatherings, she would introduce me to people, relatives, family, friends, whoever, and she'd say, "Don't let her touch your lottery ticket. She's our bad luck one," and people laughed. People I barely knew laughed, and I laughed too, because I had calculated very accurately by this point that laughing was the only option that didn't make everything worse. Don't laugh too sensitive. Can't take a joke, bringing bad energy to everything, including normal family fun. So I laughed every single time. And then I went somewhere alone, and I didn't laugh at all. My grandmother lived about 20 minutes away by bus, and I started going to see her on my own when I was maybe 11, 12. Nobody encouraged this. Nobody drove me or suggested it or built it into any kind of family routine. I just went because her house was different. It sounds so simple when I say it like that, but I don't know how else to describe it. Her house was just different. The air in it was different. She liked me, not in a performing fondness way, not in the slightly effortful way that some adults are kind to children they're not sure what to do with. She genuinely, straightforwardly liked me, thought I was funny, said so, asked me questions, and then actually listened to the answers, which sounds like the bare minimum of human interaction, but felt, in the context of my life at that time, like something extraordinary. She taught me to cook in her small kitchen with the window that looked out onto her garden. She told me things about her life that I don't think she told other people: her marriage, her regrets, the things she was most proud of, what she'd gotten wrong, and what she'd been right about. She gave me books. We argued about them, actually argued. And she loved it when I disagreed with her, and could explain why. She never once called me bad luck. She called me Sarah, my actual name, said it like it was just my name, like it meant me and only me and wasn't loaded with anything else. Every week I got on the bus and went to her house, and for a couple of hours, I was just a kid visiting her grandmother. Not a bad omen, not an excuse, not a scapegoat, just a kid. She knew what was happening at home. I didn't give her a full report because I didn't have the language for it yet. And also, some part of me was still protective of my parents in the way. Kids are protective of parents who don't deserve it. But she was sharp and she paid attention and she filled in what I wasn't saying. She never pushed, but sometimes at the end of a visit, she'd hold my hands and look at me and say something small that I'd carry home on the bus and turn over for days afterward. That's their story, not yours. You'll see eventually what you actually are. I didn't fully believe her. I was a teenager who had been told the opposite thing for years by everyone with authority over her. But I filed it away, kept it somewhere safe. Turns out I was keeping it for later. Turns out I needed it. My grandmother died when I was 22. She left me her house. I need to be clear about what this was and wasn't. She wasn't wealthy. The house wasn't a grand estate or anything remotely like that. It was a solid, well-maintained, fully paid-off house in a neighborhood that was decent and getting better. She'd owned it outright for 20 years, and she left it to me specifically in a will she had drawn up with an attorney present while she was completely mentally sharp and had been for her entire life. She also left a letter with the attorney for me. I sat in that office and read it, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not sad crying, or not only sad, crying more like the crying that happens when something you've been carrying very carefully for a very long time finally gets set down somewhere safe. She said she'd watched me my whole life. Said she'd seen what was happening even when I didn't know she was seeing it. Said she wanted to give me something real, something solid. Something that said in concrete terms what she believed about me because she had lived long enough to know that what people say is often less reliable than what they do. And this was the most concrete thing she could do. She said she wanted me to have a foundation. That word, foundation. I read it about 10 times. My parents' reaction was something I was not fully prepared for, even though looking back I should have been. My mother called me a manipulator before we'd left the building, said I had engineered years of visits and kindness for exactly this outcome, that I had been running a long game on an elderly woman, that she couldn't believe none of them had seen it. My father called me a parasite. The word landed and sat there. Parasite. Jason was standing near the window and he turned and looked at me and said I should sign the house over to him. Said, and these are his actual words, I'm not making this more dramatic. This is what he said. You're bad luck anyway. It'll only burn down if you keep it. I said no. To all of it. Clearly, without a lot of words around it. Just no. The no was apparently the last thing my parents were willing to tolerate from me. My father went to my bedroom. My childhood bedroom. He opened the closet and the dresser drawers, and he threw my things, folded clothes, shoes, everything out the front door and into the driveway. Not symbolically, actually. Physically, item by item onto the concrete, while the neighbor's curtains moved. My mother stood on the porch. She had a voice that carried when she wanted it to. She wanted it to. She shouted, "Take your bad luck somewhere else." I was 22. I packed what was in the driveway into one suitcase, left the rest, held my grandmother's letter in my hand the whole drive to the attorney's office. I did not look back when I pulled out of that driveway. Not once. The first year alone in my grandmother's house was hard in ways I hadn't anticipated and don't see reflected very often in the kind of stories people tell about escaping difficult families. There's this version of the story where you leave, and the relief is so total and complete that you just sort of expand into yourself immediately, like a plant finally getting sunlight. Like the person you always were just unfolds naturally now that nobody's crushing it. That wasn't my experience. What actually happened was that I moved into my grandmother's house with one suitcase and 18 years of a story about who I was still fully installed in my brain, and the story didn't care that I'd changed the address. I heard my mother's voice constantly. Not literally, I knew she wasn't there, but in the way voices from your childhood run underneath everything when you're alone. Everything you touch turns into disaster. I heard it when I burned dinner, when a job application got rejected, when I locked myself out of the house because I'd been distracted and had to call a locksmith, and that simple, stupid human mistake felt like confirmation of the whole narrative. I started seeing a therapist about 4 months in. This was not a glamorous decision. It was a desperate one. I was sitting on the floor of the bathroom one evening, not dramatically, just sitting there because the bathroom was small, and the smallness felt manageable, thinking, I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be a person who doesn't have this weight on her. My therapist was a woman in her 50s who said very little in sessions, which was initially infuriating and eventually the exact right approach, because it meant I had to fill the silence, and what I filled it with told me things I hadn't known I knew. I went every week for 2 years. Sometimes I walked out of a session feeling genuinely worse than when I went in, not because anything had gone wrong, but because something had shifted that needed to hurt on its way out. Old stuff, ugly stuff, stuff I'd been packaging very carefully and storing somewhere I didn't look at. It worked. Slowly, messily, non-linearly, it worked. The voice got quieter, not gone, but quieter. And over time I got better at hearing it and recognizing it as hers and not mine. That distinction, whose voice is this, and is it actually true, is something I genuinely believe saved my life. The business started small because I was broke and scared and had no idea what I was doing. I had skills that my family had never valued because my family had never valued anything about me. But those skills existed regardless of whether anyone was paying attention to them. I was organized in that very specific way, that people become organized when they grow up in chaos, not naturally tidy, but compulsively structured, almost frantically so. Because structure was the thing that had made the unpredictability of home survivable. I could plan, I could execute, I could look at a broken system and find the place where it was actually broken, which sounds simple but requires a specific kind of clear-eyed thinking that is apparently less common than you'd imagine. I think I developed that skill because I'd spent 18 years living inside a broken system and trying to figure out the actual mechanics of it. While everyone around me was insisting the mechanics were me, I started consulting online, 3 clients in the first 6 months. I worked extremely hard for all 3 of them, partly because I needed the money, and partly because I needed to prove something to myself, needed to establish through repeated concrete evidence that my grandmother was right and my parents were wrong about what I was capable of. They referred me to people. Those people referred me to other people. Within a year and a half, I had more work than I could handle by myself, and I hired someone to help, and that felt genuinely unreal. That felt like something happening to a different person, and I cried in the car on the way home from signing the contract with my first employee because I couldn't fully process the distance between this moment and the driveway and the suitcase and my mother's voice carrying down the street. More people, more clients, a second company that grew out of the first one. I renovated the house with the first real profit I made. Spent 2 years making decisions every weekend: tiles, windows, the garden, the kitchen my grandmother had taught me to cook in. I kept her furniture, most of it, just cleaned it up and let it be what it was. I kept the window that looked out over the garden. Rental properties, investments, decisions made slowly and carefully with help from people who knew more than me, which is the only financial advice I will ever give anyone, because the people who go it alone on the financial stuff are almost never the ones who end up okay. By 30, I had 3 companies and 2 properties and a financial position that the 22-year-old sitting on the bathroom floor genuinely could not have imagined. But more than that, and this is the thing that I actually think matters, the thing that the numbers don't capture for the first time in my memory, I woke up in the morning without immediately scanning for what was wrong. I didn't brace anymore, or not as much. Not automatically. I just got up, made coffee, started the day. That sounds like nothing. That is actually everything. A lot was happening at home while I was gone. I didn't track this obsessively. I didn't have alerts set up or anything. But I have an aunt on my mother's side who I stayed in contact with. One of the few people in my extended family who had treated me with basic decency, and she would call occasionally and share things she thought I should know. My father's business failed about 2 years after I left. It had been struggling for a while, which was why I was the explanation for it. Without me, as the explanation, the struggling had to become someone's responsibility, and nobody in that house was good at responsibility. Jason's gambling, which had been a casual thing when he was young, became not casual at all. By his late 20s, it was serious, real money. Real debt. The kind of debt that comes with people calling the house. My parents kept trying to bail him out, which meant money leaving their accounts steadily with nothing to show for it, which meant financial strain compounding on financial strain. My mother had taken out loans, multiple loans, to cover Jason, to keep the household running after the business went under, to maintain the surface of a life that didn't have enough underneath it anymore. The house went into foreclosure. Cars got taken. The relatives who had laughed at my bad luck nickname, who had joked about lottery tickets and bad energy, stopped taking calls from my father when it became clear the calls were about money. Funny thing about family solidarity. Turns out it's mostly available when it doesn't cost anything. I heard all of this in pieces from my aunt, and I sat with each piece for a while before filing it away. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think the honest version is more complicated than people expect. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I felt tired. The specific tiredness of watching something predictable happen, something you could see from miles away, finally arrive. 8 years of silence, complete, total, unbroken silence from their end. No birthday calls, no texts, no attempts, nothing. And then one evening I answered a number I didn't recognize because I was expecting a call from a contractor and wasn't paying attention to the screen. My father's voice, smaller than I remembered. That's the first thing I noticed. His voice had always taken up a lot of space, and now it just didn't. Like someone had let some of the air out of it. He said my name. I said his. He got to the point faster than I expected. Said they were in a difficult situation. Said things had been very hard. Said he was wondering if there was anything I could do. And I want you to understand. I have replayed this moment many times, turned it over and looked at it from different angles. Tried to see if I was mishearing it or misinterpreting it, he said. I think it's time you repaid us for raising you. I didn't speak for a moment, not because it hurt. It didn't hurt in the way he probably intended it to. I had done enough work by this point that his framing landed as information rather than injury information about who he still was, about what hadn't changed, about the accounting system inside his head that had apparently been running the whole time. I was quiet because I was genuinely, in a detached way, interested in the audacity of it. Repay us for raising you. As in raising me was a service I'd received. As in the childhood bad luck. Everything you touch, take your bad luck somewhere else, was something I owed a debt for. My mother got on the phone. Soft voice, careful voice, the voice she used when she was performing emotion rather than having it. She said ever since you left nothing has gone right. She said things had changed and family was family, and maybe there was a way to move forward. I let her finish. And then she said it, the thing I have honestly thought about probably once a week since it happened. Maybe you took our luck with you. 8 years. Foreclosure, debt, addiction, repossession, 8 years of consequences arriving in waves. All of it directly traceable to actual decisions made by actual people who lived in that house. And the explanation she had landed on. Still, you took our luck with you. Same story. New circumstances. Not a single syllable of genuine reckoning. I held the phone and thought about my grandmother's letter and the word foundation, and I said, very calmly, I'd like you all to come to dinner. I didn't do the dinner for closure in the therapy speak sense. I don't actually believe in closure as a destination. I think you just slowly get further from the thing, and it takes up less space over time. I didn't do it for revenge in the way revenge is usually pictured, some blazing, satisfying confrontation where you finally say the exact right thing. And everyone understands, and acknowledges, and apologizes. I did it because I had something I needed them to see. Not me, exactly. Though there was some of that. More specifically, I needed them to stand in the middle of my life. The actual physical space of the life I had built. I needed them to have to look at it with their own eyes and understand, in the most concrete possible terms, that the girl they threw out of a driveway with a suitcase had built something they couldn't take away from her. That's the honest reason. That and the envelopes. I spent the week before in a state that wasn't quite nervousness and wasn't quite calm. Somewhere between the two. I cleaned the house, which it didn't need. I planned the menu 3 times. I chose what to wear with a degree of thought that I recognized was slightly excessive and didn't stop. I told my therapist I was doing this. She didn't tell me not to. She asked me what I was hoping for, and I thought about it for a while and said, I'm not sure. And she said, that's okay. Just stay honest with yourself about it while it's happening. That was good advice. I tried to follow it. The envelopes were the thing I thought about most. I had been putting together the pieces for about a month quietly. Carefully, the way I do most things now. Making sure everything was correct. Checking it twice. 3 envelopes. 1 for each of them. They drove up at 6:30, which was on time, which told me something because my family had never been on time for anything. On time meant they were trying. On time meant they had dressed nicely, which they had my mother's hair done the way she used to do it for occasions. Jason in an actual collared shirt, which for Jason practically counted as formal wear. They stood at the entrance of my house, and the expressions on their faces when they looked around. I had prepared myself for this moment, genuinely tried to anticipate it, imagined it in different versions at different times over the years. The real thing was still something I hadn't fully expected. They were recalibrating. You could see it happening in real time. The house was beautiful, not showy, not designed to impress in a loud way, just genuinely beautiful in the way that spaces become beautiful. When someone has taken time with them, has actually thought about each thing in them, has lived in them happily enough that happiness becomes part of the atmosphere. My grandmother's furniture, cleaned up and restored. Her kitchen, rebuilt and expanded, but with the window kept exactly where it had always been. Books everywhere. Plants that had been alive for years. Light coming through windows I had chosen. The specific, unperformable quality of a home that belongs to someone. My father looked around slowly. And then he said, quiet and almost to himself, in a voice that made me feel something I wasn't prepared to feel. I knew you'd be successful. He said it like he'd always thought so, like he'd predicted this, like he'd had faith in me the whole time. I thought about a 9-year-old girl standing in yellow afternoon light being told that things had been better before she was born. I didn't say what I was thinking. I said, "Dinner's almost ready. Come sit down." We sat. Honestly, the dinner itself was strange. There's no other word for it. We made conversation about things that didn't matter. My mother complimented the house 3 times in slightly different ways. My father asked about my work in the general curious tone of someone who is trying to seem relaxed while not being relaxed at all. Jason was quieter than I'd ever seen him, which was disorienting because Jason had always operated at high volume. He kept looking around, taking things in. I couldn't read his expression and wasn't sure I wanted to. The food was good. I had made sure of that. Not as a performance of success. The food was good because I cared about the food, because cooking is something I love now, something my grandmother gave me, and I wasn't going to do it badly because of the circumstances. We got through the main course. We got through most of it without anything cracking open. Then dessert. And with dessert, the envelopes. 1 each. Their names on the outside in my handwriting. My mother touched hers and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully interpret. My father picked his up with the easy confidence of a man who assumes envelopes addressed to him contain good news. Jason turned his over twice. My father opened his first. He read it, and I watched his face go through things. Confusion, then a specific kind of dawning that wasn't comfortable. Then something settling into his features that I want to call deflation, because that's the most accurate word I have for it. Like the last of something leaving. Inside was documentation of the foreclosure on their house, and alongside it, documentation of who had purchased it when it came to auction. Me. They had been living, without knowing it, in a house I owned. The envelope didn't make threats. It didn't gloat. It simply laid out what was true, documented and signed, the way my grandmother had documented what she wanted for me. Clean, factual, legal. My father put it down on the table very carefully. Jason opened his... He read it in a way that made me think he was reading it again right after, checking to make sure he'd understood. He'd accumulated significant debts over the years. Various sources, debts that had been sold, as debts are bundled and moved around in ways that even Jason probably hadn't tracked carefully. I had acquired them through a debt investment company that had been acting on my behalf, legally and completely. Every penny Jason owed was now owed to me. He looked up at me and then looked back down at the paper, and I genuinely cannot tell you what was on his face in that moment. I've tried to describe it to my therapist and to my aunt, and I always get stuck. It wasn't what I expected, which I realize is vague, but that's the truth. He put the paper down. My mother opened hers last. She opened it slowly, with the careful hands of someone who has started to understand that this envelope is different from what she thought it was. Inside was a photograph of my grandmother. The specific one I had chosen deliberately, carefully, after going through everything I had of her. A photo from when she was maybe 60, caught in the middle of laughing at something outside the frame. Not posed, just her, caught in a real moment, looking more purely herself than any photo I'd ever seen of her. And underneath it, the letter. Her letter, written in her handwriting. The particular handwriting that got slightly looser as she got older. Every word familiar to me, because I had read it hundreds of times. The part I had chosen to include not the whole letter, just the part I thought was most important. The part that had changed the most for me. If they come to you only when they have something to gain, don't mistake their need for love. Love doesn't have conditions attached. What comes to you with conditions isn't love, it's a transaction. You don't owe what was never freely given. My mother read it. Once, I think. Maybe twice. And she started crying. Real tears. I believe they were real. Whatever else she was and whatever she'd done, I think sitting in that room with my grandmother's handwriting in front of her, something connected to a truth she'd been working very hard not to look at. Nobody said anything for almost a full minute. The silence was one of the most complete things I've ever been in the middle of. Then my father looked up at me, and he asked, "So, are you going to help us?" I stood up. I walked to the front door and I opened it and I stood there for a moment before I turned around. I turned around. They were all watching me. My mother had stopped crying. My father had his hands flat on the table, the way he used to when he was making himself be calm. Jason was completely still in a way that I associated with Jason being genuinely uncertain, which was rare. I said, "You called me bad luck for 18 years." They didn't speak, so I want to ask you something and I want you to actually think about it. Still nothing. Why would you invite bad luck back into your lives? The silence that came after that was different from the one before. The one before had been shock. This one was something older and heavier and more complicated. Something that had been in this family for decades, finally sitting in the room without a story wrapped around it. I held their faces in mine for a moment longer. Then I looked toward the open door. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. My mother stood first. Then my father, Jason last. They walked out, not with screaming, not with a dramatic confrontation that tied everything up. Just they walked out the door and I stood aside and they went. Jason paused in the doorway. He looked at me. I don't know what he was going to say. He didn't say it. He just looked at me for a second with something in his face that I think might have been the beginning of something, some shift, some recognition that he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Maybe he never will. He left. I closed the door. My aunt told me about a year after the dinner that people in the neighborhood where I grew up still talk about my family, about how things went wrong for them after I left, about how the bad luck spread to fill the whole house once I was gone. They say I took the family's luck with me. I've thought a lot about how to explain why that framing is wrong. I've tried different ways in my head. I've gone around it and through it, and I keep coming back to the same place. I didn't take their luck. I was their scapegoat. The moment I left, the system had no one to point at. The actual causes of things were still there. The actual patterns were still operating. The choices were still being made. But now, when something went wrong, there was no story to explain it away. No bad luck child to absorb it. Just the thing itself sitting there, requiring someone to take responsibility for it. They were not prepared for that. They had spent years building a life that didn't require them to be prepared for that. That's what fell apart when I left. Not fortune. Not some mystical family luck that had been flowing through me and that I carried off in my suitcase. Just reality. The normal, unavoidable, completely non-mystical reality of choices and consequences that they had been successfully avoiding for decades by using me as the reason none of it was their fault. I have a good life. I want to say that plainly without dressing it up or making it sound like a conclusion I arrived at neatly. I have a genuinely good life work I care about. A house I love. Enough money to feel safe, friendships I trust, a therapist I still see occasionally because maintenance is real. I have my grandmother's photo on the wall of my office. The laughing one. The real one. The one I gave my mother a copy of in the envelope. I see it every day. It says what it has always said to me. You are not what they said you are. I believe it now, mostly. On the bad days, I'm still working on it. That's okay. What I don't have is a relationship with my parents or with Jason. I've thought about this from different directions at different points. Whether reconciliation is something I want, whether forgiveness is something I owe, whether family means something I'm not giving it enough credit for. I always arrive at the same answer. Forgiveness and relationship are separate things. I have worked hard to release the active weight of what they did to me, because carrying it was hurting me more than it was doing anything to them. That's a kind of forgiveness. I think, even if it doesn't look like the greeting card version. But a relationship requires something from both people, and what would be required from my parents is a capacity for genuine accountability that I have not seen evidence of. My mother still, as far as I know through my aunt, believes on some level that my absence was the cause of their problems. Not a symptom of them, the cause. You can't build something real on that foundation. So I don't try. If you're watching this and some part of it is sounding familiar, not necessarily the specific details, maybe not the inheritance or the dinner, but the feeling, the thing underneath all of it, then this part is for you. The story someone tells about you is not you. It can feel exactly like you, especially if they started telling it when you were young enough that you didn't have anything to compare it to. It can feel woven into you. Can feel like a fact about yourself. The way your height is a fact, or your eye color is a fact. It isn't. It's theirs. Built from their needs. shaped by what they required you to be so they didn't have to look at what they actually were. You don't have to keep carrying it. You don't have to earn your way out of it through some dramatic confrontation, or some elaborate revenge, or some perfect moment that proves them wrong. You can just leave it, put it down, walk away from it, and build something of your own, starting from wherever you are right now, with whatever you have right now. The building is slow. The building is sometimes really hard, and there are weeks where it feels like you're making no progress, and you have to trust the process even when the process is invisible. But it works. I am evidence that it works. My name is Sarah. For 18 years, they told me I was bad luck. Turns out I was the only thing holding their whole story together. When I took myself back, the story finally had to become true. If any part of this was yours, drop it in the comments. I've got time, and I'm listening. Share it if someone you know needs to hear it today.